My friends, as we come together in this sacred moment, I would like us to look very honestly at something that has occupied the human mind for thousands of years. It is prayer. And yet, for all the prayers uttered, for all the words spoken into the heavens, for all the tears shed in earnest pleading, the world still suffers. People pray for peace, and wars continue. People pray for health, and disease persists. People pray for supply, and shortages remain. And so it must be clear that the difficulty does not lie in God, nor in any failure of divine love, nor in any reluctance of the infinite to reveal itself. No, the difficulty lies in the way mankind has been taught to pray. For most of the world, prayer is an act of reaching outward. It is the attempt to persuade a distant God, a God somewhere beyond the clouds or beyond the stars, to intervene in human affairs. And so the individual becomes a beggar in his own universe, calling upon a power he believes is separate from himself. But I say to you, that very attitude is the beginning and the end of unanswered prayer. For the moment you believe that there is a God outside of your own being, you have already placed yourself in separation, and separation is the one condition in which spiritual fulfillment can never appear. You see, the tragedy of the human race is not that God is silent, but that man is deafened by his own belief in a God who must be informed, persuaded, or convinced. The tragedy is not that prayers go unanswered, but that the majority of prayers are never truly prayers at all. They are fear in disguise. They are anxiety wrapped in holy language. They are the call of an individual who believes he stands apart from his source and hopes that by enough words, enough pleading, enough urgency, he might move the hand of the divine. But the infinite does not move according to human insistence. The infinite is not stirred by emotion, nor by eloquence, nor by pressure. God is not a responder to human will. God is the very presence, the very life, the very consciousness that is already within you. And until this is understood, prayer remains ineffective, because prayer that begins in separation must end in disappointment. And so the first truth we must face gently, humbly, but firmly is that the common notion of prayer is almost entirely mistaken. Prayer is not the act of getting God to do something. Prayer is not the attempt to change circumstances. Prayer is not the effort to attract something that is absent. No, prayer is the sacred recognition of what already is. Prayer is the turning within to the presence that has never left you, the presence that neither slumbers nor sleeps, the presence that cannot be improved, cannot be persuaded, and cannot be moved because it is the fullness of being already operating at the center of your existence. When this is understood, when you see that God is not somewhere else, that God is the very essence of your consciousness, then prayer begins. And only then can prayer bear fruit. This, my friends, is the great misunderstanding we must set aside if we are to enter the deeper work that lies before us. For prayer does not begin with words. It begins with awareness. Prayer does not begin with asking. It begins with recognition. Prayer does not begin in the outer world. It begins in the silent sanctuary of your own being. In a few moments, we will examine why even the most earnest prayers seem to fail, and what must be seen before spiritual activity can flow freely. But for now, let us hold this one truth close. God is not afar off. God is closer than your breath, nearer than your heartbeat, and it is only in the recognition of this nearness that true prayer can unfold. And so we continue, my friends, by looking directly at a truth that is both simple and profound. If prayer, as the world knows it, is largely ineffective, why is that so? Why does the human race continue to pray with sincerity, with hope, with urgency and yet experience so little of the spiritual fruit promised in Scripture? The answer is not mysterious. It is not hidden in esoteric language. It lies in this: most prayers rest upon the belief in two powers. You see, the moment an individual begins a prayer with the thought, "I have a problem and I must now ask God to remove it," he has already divided the universe. He has established a problem on one side and God on the other. He has created an adversary, whether that adversary is disease, lack, danger, conflict, or fear, and he believes this adversary has a measure of power, a degree of reality, an authority to act in his life. And then he seeks to invoke a second power, God, to overcome the first. This, my friends, is the essence of every unanswered prayer. For the moment you accept two powers in your consciousness, good and evil, harmony and discord, God and problem, you have stepped out of the spiritual universe and into the realm of illusion, the realm where struggle is inevitable and peace is always delayed. The Master told us plainly, resist not evil. Why? Because in resisting, in opposing, in fearing, we give form and substance to that which in truth has no power at all. Let me say it gently but with complete clarity. There is no power apart from God. No disease power, no financial power, no destructive power, no opposing power anywhere in the universe. And yet listen carefully, the very act of pleading with God to remove a condition is the act of declaring the condition to be a power. Each request, each petition, each anxious thought affirms the presence of a second power, a power that must be fought, corrected, treated, or overcome. In that very moment, the prayer loses its spiritual force because the individual is no longer abiding in truth. He is struggling within a divided mind. Understand this well. If you pray to God to fix something, you are already confessing that something stands outside the government of God. If you pray to God to heal, you are already accepting disease as a reality. If you pray to God to supply your needs, you are already conceding that supply is lacking. And if you pray to God to remove fear, you are already upholding fear as a genuine power. This is why prayers go unanswered, not because God refuses, but because man prays from a state of spiritual ignorance, unconscious of the fact that he is affirming exactly what he hopes to dissolve. True prayer, the prayer that bears fruit, begins with the recognition that there is no power apart from the One. There is not God and something else. There is not spirit and material condition. There is not the infinite and a problem. There is only God, only presence, only the one life expressing itself. And so before prayer can be effective, this fundamental error must be removed from thought. The belief in two powers must dissolve. The divided mind must become a single mind. The consciousness must return to its original purity. God is the one power, the one presence, the one reality. Only then can prayer unfold into realization. In the next part, we will look at the greatest error mankind makes in prayer, the subtle but devastating mistake of praying to God as though God were separate from us. But first, hold this truth. All unanswered prayer has one root, one cause, one misunderstanding, the belief that there is a power other than God. When that belief is surrendered, prayer becomes not an act of asking, but an experience of revelation. Now, my friends, let us come to the heart of a truth that must be grasped before spiritual practice can bear its full fruit. If the belief in two powers is the root of unanswered prayer, then the branch of that same tree is the belief that God is someone, somewhere, to whom we must speak, from whom we must draw help, upon whom we must call as though he were outside of our own being. This is the fatal mistake that has crippled the spiritual life of humanity for centuries, the belief that prayer is directed to God. You see, the very moment you turn toward a God afar off, you have stepped into illusion. You have placed God in time, in space, in distance. You have imagined a God who must hear, must respond, must travel from the invisible world into the visible. And in doing so, you have separated yourself from the only place where God can ever be known, within your own consciousness. Let us be absolutely clear. God is not in the sky. God is not in a temple. God is not in a book, a ritual, a doctrine, or a system of human belief. God is the very presence of your own being, the life that animates you, the consciousness by which you are aware. The kingdom is not coming from without, it is recognized from within. And yet, how often people pray as though they were calling across a great distance. God, heal me. God, save me. God, help me. God, give me what I lack. All such prayers, no matter how sincere, are prayers of separation. A prayer that begins with God, do something, has already declared God is not here. A prayer that begins with God, give me, has already declared I do not have. A prayer that begins with God, save me, has already declared something has power over me. And so the prayer fails, not because God refuses to listen, but because the one praying has not yet entered the truth of oneness. You see, my friends, prayer does not go outward. Prayer arises from the depth of being. It is not spoken to God, it is spoken from God. That is why Jesus could say, I can of mine own self do nothing. The words he spoke, the works he accomplished, were not of a man pleading with a deity, but of God speaking through a consciousness surrendered to the One. To pray from God is to recognize, I and the Father are one. All that the Father is, I already am. All that the Father hath is already mine, not through acquisition, but through realization. In that moment, prayer is no longer an act of petition, it becomes an act of recognition. It becomes the silent acknowledgement of the presence that is forever functioning at the center of your being, forever complete, forever whole, forever expressing itself. And so, the fatal mistake, the mistake that ends prayer before it begins, is the belief that God is absent and must be summoned. God cannot be summoned. God is omnipresence. God cannot be persuaded. God is perfection. God cannot be moved. God is already the fullness of all being. When you pray to God, you pray from separation. When you pray from God, you pray from oneness. This, my friends, is the pivot upon which the entire spiritual life turns. And when this truth is felt, even in a small degree, the tone of prayer changes. It becomes quiet. It becomes peaceful. It becomes a resting, not a striving. And from that resting, the activity of God begins to flow. In the next section, we will come to the great turning point, the split second of awareness that transforms prayer from human effort into divine realization. But before we take that step, let this truth rest gently in your heart. God is not reached through prayer. God is revealed through prayer. And prayer, to be effective, must begin in the recognition that God is already where you are. And now we arrive, my friends, at that sacred moment upon which the entire structure of spiritual living rests. It is not a moment measured by the clock. It is not a moment born of effort or discipline. It is a moment that may come in the midst of silence or in the midst of turmoil, in the quiet of your room or in the noise of the world. It is a split second of awareness in which you awaken to the truth that God is not someone you reach for. God is the very presence that lives you. This instant, this inner turning, this dawning recognition is what changes every prayer. For until this moment arrives, prayer remains an activity of the human mind, seeking, reaching, asking, hoping. But the moment the truth is touched, prayer ceases to be a human act and becomes a divine revelation. It is here, in this flash of awareness, that the burden lifts, the fear dissolves, the struggle ends. Not because the outer condition has changed, but because you have awakened from the dream of separation. Let me speak plainly. True prayer is not asking. True prayer is awareness. Awareness of what? Awareness of oneness. Awareness of the one power. Awareness that the presence you seek is the presence that is already functioning at the center of your being. In that instant of realization, the entire fabric of the problem begins to unravel, not through force, not through effort, not through will, but through the simple recognition that there is no other power acting upon you. The problem, whatever its name or form, is seen for what it is, an appearance without substance, a shadow that cannot withstand the light of truth. When the truth dawns, you do not say, "My problem is solved." You say, "There was no problem in God, and therefore none in me." You do not say, "God has removed the illness." You say, "God being all, illness could never have been a power." You do not say, "God has supplied my need." You say, "Supply was never absent. Only my awareness of the source was clouded." This is the mystical moment where the human sense of life yields to the divine. It is the moment in which personal responsibility gives way to spiritual assurance. It is the moment in which you stop trying to make truth work and allow truth to reveal itself. And I tell you, this moment can come in an instant. It can come while washing dishes, walking down a street, sitting quietly in your chair. It is not created by thought. It is not brought forth by concentrated effort. It is simply recognized. This recognition, this inner click, is the very heart of spiritual realization. It is the rock upon which healing is accomplished, not by adjusting the outer picture, but by illuminating the inner consciousness. Once you have touched this awareness, even for a breath, you will know prayer is not the attempt to bring God into your condition. It is the recognition that God never left. In the next section, we will explore how to enter this state more consciously, more frequently, through one simple act, the practice of stopping, of turning inward to that which has always been present. But remember this, the moment you sense the presence, even faintly, the prayer is already answered, because the revelation of the One leaves no room for a second power. And now, my friends, having seen that prayer becomes effective only when it rises from the awareness of oneness, we must look at the simple practice that opens the door to this awareness. It is not a complicated technique. It is not a ritual reserved for holy places or sacred hours. It is the humble, quiet act of stopping the restless activity of the human mind, stopping the frantic search for solutions, stopping the ceaseless effort to make God act according to our will. You see, the human mind is forever in motion. It seeks, it fears, it calculates, it plans. It is always moving towards something or away from something. And yet all spiritual realization begins not in movement, but in stillness. All revelation is born not of thinking, but of resting. All truth enters consciousness not through effort, but through silence. This is why, in the infinite way, we teach the practice of stopping. It is the moment in which you withdraw your attention from the outer world, not to escape it, not to deny it, but to recognize that your good is not in the outer scene at all. It is the moment in which you quietly turn inward and acknowledge, "Thou art here," or simply, "I am." These words are not spoken to attract a presence. They are spoken to awaken your awareness to the presence already functioning. They are not words of request. They are words of recognition. They do not aim to change anything. They aim to reveal what already is. Stopping means this. For a breath, for a heartbeat, for a moment, you release every attempt to improve your life. You lay down the tools of the intellect. You cease your struggle against conditions. You no longer try to direct God, guide God, or instruct God. In that instant, you create the space in consciousness through which the divine activity can reveal itself. This stopping is not an escape from responsibility. It is the entrance into your only true responsibility, the responsibility to be still and let the presence be the presence. Nothing is gained by continuing the mental noise that has governed human living for thousands of years. Something is gained, everything is gained when the noise is silenced. And this practice is not reserved for long hours of meditation. In fact, I would urge you not to wait for long hours. The mind will resist. The world will interfere. Instead, take brief, frequent pauses throughout your day, many times a day, if possible. For just a minute or two, turn your attention inward with no purpose, no request, no agenda. Simply become receptive. Simply acknowledge, I and the Father are one. The place whereon I stand is holy ground. Thou art here. In these moments of quiet turning, something begins to shift. A subtle peace enters consciousness. A sense of assurance rises, unexplainable but undeniable. You begin to feel, not merely understand, but feel the presence of the one that never leaves you. And as you cultivate this sacred stopping, you discover that it takes less and less time to enter the awareness of oneness. In time, a minute is enough. A breath is enough. A glance inward is enough. This, my friends, is the first practice of true prayer. Stop, turn within, acknowledge the presence, and rest. In the next section, we will explore the essence of this rest, what it means to listen in prayer, to be receptive to the divine impulse that speaks without sound and moves without effort. But for now, let this truth settle deeply. When you stop turning to the world for answers, you begin turning toward the only place where answers exist, within the silence of your own being. And now, my friends, having learned the sacred art of stopping, we come to the very essence of prayer. For once the mind grows still, once the inner turning has been made, we discover something remarkable. True prayer is not what we have been taught. It is not the speaking of words. It is not the forming of thoughts. It is not the repetition of formulas or affirmations. No, true prayer is listening, pure receptivity to the divine activity that is already present. The greater part of the world prays by speaking to God, but in spiritual living, we pray by allowing God to speak within us. We do not pray to be heard by God. We pray to hear God. We do not pray to move the divine. We pray to be moved by the divine. And so prayer becomes not a monologue, but a holy silence in which the still small voice can make itself known. Let me tell you, the entire universe is always filled with the movement of spirit. God is forever imparting, forever pouring, forever expressing. There is no moment when the divine ceases its activity. If we are not receiving, it is not because God is withholding. It is because our consciousness is too filled with noise, too preoccupied with desire, too occupied with fear, to hear the whisper of the infinite. And this is why we stop. This is why we turn within. Not to present God with a list of needs, but to empty ourselves of all that obstructs our hearing. For in the silence, something happens not through our effort, but through our receptivity. A wordless assurance arises. A quiet sense of rightness appears. A direction reveals itself not through thought, but through a gentle inner knowing. This is the comforter that Jesus promised. This is the Spirit of truth that leads us into all truth. This is the divine impulse that needs no human vocabulary to be understood. When you truly listen in prayer, you are not attempting to hear a voice, you are not waiting for words to form, you are not looking for visions or signs. You are simply becoming receptive to the movement of God, the flow of grace, the unfolding realization that begins as a feeling, a peace, a certainty that wells up from within. You may find, at times, that nothing at all seems to happen. There is only quiet, only stillness. But I tell you, that stillness is the prayer, that quiet is the answer. For in that moment, you are resting in the presence, and the presence is doing its work. Long before your outer life reflects harmony, the inner harmony has begun. Long before the appearance changes, consciousness has changed. And that change is the seed from which every demonstration grows. This listening is not something you force. It is not something you strain to accomplish. It is an allowing, a yielding, a gentle opening of the soul to God's activity. And as you practice this receptive silence, you will discover that the divine impulse comes in many forms. Sometimes it comes as a sudden knowing, complete, whole, unmistakable. Sometimes it comes as peace, dissolving fear without a single word spoken. Sometimes it comes as clarity regarding what to do or what not to do. And sometimes it comes as an inner conviction that all is well even when nothing external has yet changed. But always it comes within. It does not come from the world. It does not come from people. It does not come from books. It arises from the ground of your own being, for that ground is God. So remember, prayer is not speaking. Prayer is listening. Prayer is not asking. Prayer is receptivity. Prayer is not reaching outward. Prayer is yielding inward to the one presence. In our next section, we will explore what happens when this listening ripens, when the human will falls silent and the divine activity takes over, entirely without effort, entirely without struggle. That is the moment when healing begins, not by your doing, but by your witnessing. And now, my friends, let us move into the heart of the transformative moment that every spiritual seeker must eventually encounter. It is the moment when personal will falls away and divine activity begins to reveal itself. This moment is subtle. It does not arrive with trumpets or fanfare. It comes quietly, gently, almost unnoticed, yet its effect is profound. It is the shift from human effort to spiritual realization, from trying to make something happen to allowing the infinite to reveal what already is. You see, as long as we rely on the human mind, its plans, its strategies, its fears, its desires, we remain bound to the very limitations we are trying to escape. The human mind, no matter how disciplined or sincere, operates within the realm of duality. It sees two powers, two forces, two realities. It attempts to fix one and invoke the other. And so long as the mind is active, prayer cannot rise above its level, because prayer is being conducted in the very arena where the problem appears to have power. This is why we must come to a point where the personal will is no longer the initiator of our spiritual work. There must be a moment, a holy moment, when we stop trying to heal, stop trying to improve, stop trying to attract, stop trying to change. In that stopping, something greater than human intention begins its work. Joel Goldsmith often said, "You do not heal, you witness. You do not correct error. You do not fight illusion. You do not manipulate appearances. You bear witness to the action of God, which is forever functioning, whether the human mind recognizes it or not. When personal will subsides, even slightly, the divine begins to move into expression. But it does not move through effort, it moves through consciousness. It does not act because you command it, it acts because you have removed your resistance to it. And that resistance, my friends, is always the same thing: the belief that you must do something. When the belief in personal doership relaxes, even for a few seconds, a new atmosphere enters the soul. You begin to sense that you are not the one making life happen, you are the one through whom life is happening. You are not the source. You are the transparency. You are not the architect. You are the instrument. This is the inner shift that marks the beginning of all true demonstration. It is the moment when you see, I no longer need to struggle with this condition because the divine presence is already here. I no longer need to fight this fear because fear has no law to support it. I no longer need to seek supply because supply is the nature of the infinite expressing as my very being. And when this realization dawns, the problem, whatever its form, begins to dissolve, not because you solved it, but because the belief that gave it life has been withdrawn. The outer appearance changes because the inner standpoint has changed. The world rearranges itself because you have stopped trying to rearrange it. Harmony appears because harmony was always present, but your anxiety concealed it. This, my friends, is the spiritual truth. All problems dissolve in the presence of realized oneness, because there is simply no place for a second power to operate. Where oneness is revealed, fear cannot remain. Where oneness is understood, lack cannot persist. Where oneness is felt, the sense of isolation disappears and love flows of its own accord. And this shift, this yielding, is not a one-time event. It happens again and again in the small moments, in the brief pauses, in the quiet acknowledgments. Each time you stop relying on yourself and lean into the presence, consciousness expands. Each time you surrender the personal will, grace flows a little more freely. Each time you cease your inner effort, the divine begins its effortless work. In the next section, we will look at how this inner shift becomes the foundation of daily living, how spiritual realization is carried into the small moments of your life, transforming ordinary experiences into opportunities for awareness, until eventually you live not intermittently in God, but continuously in the consciousness of the One. And now, my friends, we come to the practical heart of this work, how to live this truth, not occasionally, not only in meditation, but moment by moment in the very midst of daily life. For spiritual realization is not reserved for holy hours or sacred retreats. It is meant to permeate every ordinary moment while you are speaking with a friend, reading a newspaper, washing dishes, standing in a grocery line, or caring for your family. Wherever you stand, the ground is holy if you know who stands there. You see, the presence of God does not visit you in meditation and then depart when you open your eyes. No, the presence is constant, unbroken, unchanging. What shifts is not God, but your awareness. And so the task of the spiritual student is simply this: to remember again and again the truth that has already been revealed, not by forcing, not by straining, but through gentle, consistent turning. When a moment of fear arises, stop. Do not argue with it. Do not analyze it. Do not fight it. Stop, turn within, and acknowledge. God is the one power, and I am in that one. When a sense of lack touches your thoughts, stop. Do not grasp. Do not worry. Do not plan frantically. Stop, turn within, and remember. All that the Father has is here now as my consciousness. When the body seems to ache or falter, stop. Do not run to fear. Do not empower the condition. Stop, turn within, and quietly note, I am not this body that appears. I am the life that animates it. When time feels short and pressures mount, stop. Do not rush. Do not surrender to anxiety. Stop, turn within, and rest in the truth. I live in the eternal now. Time is not my master. In this way, you begin to live the truth, not intellectually, but consciously. You begin to take dominion over the 4 temporal kingdoms simply by not bowing to them, by refusing to acknowledge them as powers. And each time you stop, even briefly, you loosen another thread of the illusion that holds the world in fear. These moments of remembrance, though small, accumulate. They build a momentum in consciousness. They establish a new center of gravity within you, a place of certainty, of peace, of quiet authority. You find that you respond differently to people, differently to events, differently to the ups and downs of daily living. Something within you has shifted, and that shift becomes the atmosphere you carry with you. This is the grace-filled life. Joel Goldsmith spoke of a life lived in constant God realization, not constant in the sense of every second of thought, but constant in the underlying awareness that is never fully lost, even when you are engaged in the world. A place from which you can return easily, quickly, naturally to the inner presence. You will discover that you begin to walk more slowly. You breathe more deeply. You speak more gently. You listen with greater patience. It is not something you do intentionally. It is something that happens when the mind bows to the presence. Gradually, you see that the world around you begins to reflect this shift. Situations become harmonious without your manipulating them. People feel comforted simply by being near you, though you say nothing. Opportunities appear without your seeking. Solutions arise without your planning. And you know beyond doubt that these are not the products of human effort, but the fruits of spiritual awareness. For when heaven is recognized within, it begins to appear without. When the kingdom is found here, it expresses everywhere. When God is realized in consciousness, God becomes visible in form. In the next section, we will bring all of this into a final understanding, a closing contemplation on what it means to live in the one presence, resting in the one power, and allowing grace to complete its perfect work. And now, my friends, as we bring this time of shared contemplation to a close, let us return once more to the foundation of all spiritual work, the recognition of one power, one presence, one life. For everything we have spoken, everything we have practiced, everything we have glimpsed in these moments rests upon that single truth. There is not God and something else. There is not spirit and matter. There is not the infinite and the problem. There is only God, appearing as your consciousness, appearing as your very being, appearing as the harmony of all that concerns you. When this truth is known, not merely thought, not merely repeated, but known, every prayer is answered in the only way prayer can be answered, through realization. The answer is never something added to you. The answer is the revelation of what has always been true, but was hidden behind a veil of fear, a veil of belief, a veil of separation. And so, as you leave this moment, you do not carry a new technique. You do not carry a new formula. You do not carry a new method. You carry a new awareness, an inner knowing that God is not someone to whom you must speak, but the very presence that speaks through you. You carry the assurance that you are not praying to God, but that God is praying as you, expressing through your consciousness as peace, as clarity, as supply, as harmony. I would like to offer you this simple truth to hold in your heart. You do not have to make prayer work. Prayer works when you stop working. When the human mind becomes still, when personal will steps aside, when the old habit of asking and pleading is surrendered, the divine activity flows without obstruction. And you find that God's grace is not something that occasionally touches your life. It is the very law of your being. So let us rest just for a moment in quiet recognition. Let us feel, not think, not analyze, but feel the nearness of the presence. Let us acknowledge silently, I and the Father are one. All that the Father is, I am. The work is done. Sit for a breath in this awareness and notice how the atmosphere changes, how the mind softens, how the heart opens, how peace settles like a gentle mantle upon your shoulders. This is the fruit of stillness. This is the result of stopping. This is the answer to every prayer, the recognition of the one that has never been absent. And as you walk back into the world, do not strive to hold this state. Do not grip it with tension. Simply return to it again and again, lightly, gently, throughout your day. For each time you turn within, even for a moment, you are watering the seed of realization, and that seed, in its own perfect season, grows into a life lived in God consciousness. You are never alone. You are never without guidance. You are never without supply. And you are never, ever separate from the one who lives as you, through you, and in you. And so, my friends, go in peace. Not the world's peace, fragile and fleeting, but the peace that the Master spoke of, the peace that passeth all understanding, the peace that comes when the heart knows God is the only power, and God is here.